Hi, good morning. So we're looking at Unit 3, which is using resources for education and training. And we're going to be doing Learning Outcome 2. Now, Learning Outcome 2 is be able to implement the minimum core when using resources in the delivery of inclusive teaching and learning. So it's got two assessment criteria. 2.1 is analyze ways in which minimum core elements can be demonstrated when using resources for inclusive teaching and learning. And then 2.2, apply minimum core elements when using resources for inclusive teaching and learning. So they're quite similar to each other. So let's make our way here. So when we're looking at minimum core skills, we really need to know what is minimum core. What is it termed as? So minimum core is when you have an understanding of literacy, language, numeracy, and IT. So English, maths, spelling and grammar, and IT skills within your normal lessons that you'll be teaching on a daily basis. So if you actually think onto the classroom environment or the learning environment that you're in now, either you're learning or you're actually teaching students, you'll notice that if you're doing, say, English class, so if you're doing something to do with comprehension for your students, you'll actually have a number of core elements embedded into that. You'll have ICT when you're doing a presentation using the interactive whiteboard. You'll have numbering as well. So sometimes you might incorporate numbers into, right, okay, what's the first step? What's the second? What's the third step? What happened next? What goes on then? And then you'll have language as well, because you're physically speaking and you're interacting with your students to convey your message. So a lot of minimum core elements happen unconsciously without you even realizing it. So these minimum core skills are actually embedded within everything that you teach. So again, like I said, they refer to as English, maths, and digital skills. Now, you've got to demonstrate a proficiency when you're doing these minimum core skills. And when you're doing these minimum core skills, it actually helps you to carry out your role professionally. It helps you to support your learners, and it helps you to actually develop your own skills in these areas as well. So 2.1. Analyze ways in which minimum core elements can be demonstrated when using resources for inclusive teaching and learning. So when you're embedding maths, English, and ICT, this can be done on a daily basis. Like I said, you do it unconsciously, to be honest, to start off with, and then it becomes habit and you're doing it all the time. So any trainer, teacher, assessor, or anybody who is supporting teaching and learning in any aspect need to know that these processes should be in place. They should be proficient in applying these core skills. So there are a few ways that you can do this. So for literacy, you can do it through reading, through writing, to getting your students to check their spelling, their grammar, their punctuation, and also the syntax of your own and your learners' work. For language, is speaking and listening. For numeracy, it could be carrying out calculations, interpreting your work, evaluating, measuring, and so on. And then for ICT, it could be using a number of technologies like e-learning activities, virtual learning environments like the VLE that you will log on to access your specification sheets and your lessons, emails, apps, video conferencing sites, digital devices, software, computer programs. So if you bring in a laptop for the students to use or an iPad for them to use, that's a simple way to do it as well. So for all of these, you actually need to make sure that you're prepared to meet the needs of your learners. So you need to meet their literacy, language, numeracy, and ITC needs and skills, because otherwise you're going to be putting them off or jeopardizing or hindering their actual learning. So I've got a couple of examples of how minimum core can be embedded. Now, this is an example taken from Anne Gravel's book called Principles and Practices of Teaching and Training. So for literacy, you can do reading relevant internal external guidance to ascertain the requirements for initial and diagnostic assessments. So when you're looking at the guidance that you're actually doing to create your lessons, to carry out your assessments. You're looking at the specifications of the qualification that you're doing. So if it's for primary or high school, you'll be looking at the national curriculum. If it's for further education, you'll be looking at the guidance and specification for awarding bodies like ATHE, OTHM, Pearson, NCFE, and so on. You might even complete templates and forms, check spelling, grammar, punctuation, and syntax also. For language, it's as simple as speaking to learners about their own individual needs. You'll ask questions, you'll try and figure out what their prior knowledge is, what their experience is, and then you'll listen to their responses and act accordingly. You'll also listen to their questions and answer them appropriately. So if they're asking you if they've got a particular query, you're going to make sure that you're actually answering that and you're not going off on a tangent. Numeracy. So you're going to calculate how long initial and diagnostic assessment activities will take. Because when you're sitting in assessment, if you've got, say, a set of 50 questions that you need to ask a learner, and you say, oh, you can get 15 minutes to do this, will they actually have time to read through those questions and answer them within those 15 minutes? You've got to be realistic. So you're going to calculate how long it will actually take. Figure out how many sessions and how many hours are going to be required when you're doing a scheme of work. Now, a scheme of work is a sort of like a plan that you create in accordance to the guidance by your awarding bodies, so national curriculum, NCFE, so on. You're going to check what sort of items or what sort of points they're actually saying that need to be taught. So in the national curriculum for a year one child, if in maths, they need to be taught about shapes. So what sort of shapes are you going to be teaching them? How many lessons are you going to be devising for that? Will it take you 1 week's worth of lessons, so 5 lessons? Or will it be something that you need to carry on for 3 weeks, or 15 lessons? How will that work? So you've got to figure that out. And then you're going to see how you're going to plan your teaching and learning and assessment activities and how long these will actually take throughout your lessons. For ICT, you'd use this on quite a big basis as teachers and anybody that supports students. So you prepare materials, you upload them to the virtual learning environment if you're working in a online-based work, or if you're in further education. For high schools and primary schools, you're going to be preparing your materials and creating presentations for them to look at. You might use a word processor or different applications to create handouts and resources and then go on and print them and scan them, photocopy them, and so on. You'll be doing presentations and resources again. You'll probably end up using email or social networking to communicate appropriately with your students, so depending on what sort of format you're on. And then you'll use different new technologies to support your learners' needs. So if there's a particular learner who needs a assistive technology, you might need to do that so you can communicate with them. Some might need some assistance in English as an additional language, so you'll use appropriate technologies to support them in that way. So that was 2.1. Now I've got some tips on how to answer this. Now, if you've already done Unit 2, you can cross-refer all of 2.1 to Unit 2. So you would put down on here, under 2.1, you'd say, please cross-refer to Unit 2, Section LO4 AC 4.1 for my responses and how to analyze ways in which minimum core elements can be demonstrated and so on. If you've not done that, and you're starting off with this unit first, you need to carry out a detailed analysis of the ways in which the minimum core elements can be demonstrated when delivering inclusive teaching and learning. So just talk about how you embed English, ICT and maths into your lessons on a daily basis. So whether you're doing science, whether you're doing art, whether you're doing a maths or an English or a comprehension lesson, if you're doing spelling, how do you do it? So you can write about things like you might have written handouts, you might have presentations where you've used ICT, you might use different types of technologies where you might have little mini robots that you use, like those Beetle bots for younger children, or an iPad. You might count, you might write numbers, you might use your fingers to count certain things for and do listings. So there's a whole way that you can do this. So on to 2.2, where it is apply minimum core elements when using resources for inclusive teaching and learning. So we've talked about embedding. Now, but what is embedding all about? Why is it done? So I'll go through this little section here. So if you're a teacher or a trainer, there's going to be a lot of opportunities to help improve the skills for your students. So things like maths, English and digital skills of, for your learners at different points within their learning program. So the way to do this to improve their English, their maths and the digital skills, to help them develop their soft skills, as we sort of call it, you do this by embedding. Now, these embedding skills are part of your specialist subject. So you don't actually treat them as separate. So if you're teaching geography, if you're teaching science, if you're doing childcare, anything that you teach, these skills that are the minimum core, English, maths, and digital skills, they are part and parcel of your course. So they're nothing separate. Don't think, oh, I've done my childcare course now. I've put down my presentations now. Right now, I need to go in and actually put all these things in extra to make sure that I get my maths, English, and ICT into it. No, they get done as you're going along. You look at activities. You might number some instead of using bullet points, you might use numbered points instead. So there's a lot of ways that you can do. So to do this adequately, you might need to update your own skills and your own knowledge in these areas first, just to get familiar with them and then be confident in actually putting them in. So these skills have a lot of names. So embedding, minimum core, there's a lot of names for these. So basic skills, skills for life, core skills, key skills, essential skills, and functional skills. So there are lots of opportunities to embed your skills. And I put a couple of images up on here as well. And like I said, they are naturally occurring. They will happen really without you even realizing. Now, if you look at this image up here, that is maths. It's counting up to 10. It's got stars at the top. It's nice. It's colorful. It's got a whole lot of little colors in. And then it's asking you particular questions. How many red stars? And then you put down how many red stars are there at the top there. But then you've also got English in here where they are embedding. You're physically having to read the question. It just doesn't say, numbers. It's not got that on there. Then you've got the colorful parts on here, which are really pinpointing. So if somebody really doesn't know they're not 100% confident in reading, then they could look at the color red there, and then they'll say, oh, that's what they're asking me, so they can do a bit of guesswork in there as well. So I've got a few examples I'm going to go over. Now, for example, if you're teaching cookery, now this is how we would embed the different points into it. For English, you would embed it by having a recipe where you'd read it. You'd get your students to research and read healthy eating magazines or look at books. You'd ask them to plan a menu or write a list of ingredients. You'd ask them to discuss recipes, so they're talking, they're listening, they're asking questions, they're interacting as a group, they're thinking independently. For maths, within cooking, you're going to be calculating different weights and costs So if you're making a cake, how much flour are you going to be using? How much does a bag of flour cost? How much flour is inside it? How much of that is going to be used in your ingredient? Are you using 500 grams? Are you using 600 grams? How much are you using within that? Is it a kilo bag? Did it cost you £2.72? What was the pricing of it? You're going to be measuring your amount, so you need 500 grams. So you're going to measure that out using a scale. You're going to try and estimate your calorific values. Look at your cooking times and your temperatures as well. And then for digital skills, you'll be using a word processor to create menus, to research different websites. You might email your learners. You might create and give presentations using an interactive whiteboard. You might make a podcast, make videos, take photos of the finished products, put them onto your virtual learning environment, put them onto your organization's website and say, look, this is what my students did. This is what we made a cake today. Or year 6 made jam tarts, and then you'd have the kids with their pies in front of them. You could also put it on apps or use apps and use electronic portfolios as well. So if you were teaching plumbing, this is how we would put minimum core in there. For English, you'd have talking to customers and suppliers. You'd get your students to read product manuals and write lists of materials that they need. For maths, they'd be measuring pipes, calculating how much materials they actually need, what prices they are, how much VAT there is, what other materials they need and what labor costs they are, and then they'd be able to estimate, how much the work will be and give out estimates, and then also create invoices for work that they've done. For digital skills, you might want to get your students or for yourself to research materials, look on the internet, look at different suppliers' websites, email suppliers, tell them this is what I need, what's the best price you can give me. Use word processing for invoices. Use a spreadsheet for products and prices. You might want to create a website or teach them how to create websites or look at ones that have already been created. Taking digital photos of before and after and during the jobs, and then also maintain an electronic diary where they can say, right, this block of days have been done for this property here, we're going here. 2 days later, we've got another job in Huddersfield. On Monday, we've got one in London, and so on. So when you are embedding these skills in your lessons, you need to make sure that you're doing it in a realistic and relevant way. Now, if you're teaching plumbing and you start talking about cooking or, grams and how to figure out price per ingredient or so on, it's not relevant, is it? It's not realistic. They're not going to be able to engage with it. They're going to disengage. They're not going to listen to you, and they're going to say, oh, there's no point. This is a whole lot of faff. So keep it realistic and relevant to the subject that you are teaching. Now, there can be issues sometimes. When you're doing theoretical subjects, it can be difficult to embed these minimum core skills in because you're on a lot more of a theoretical scale there. But when you're doing practical subjects, it is much easier to do these. Now, when you're embedding skills, you need to be imaginative. Ask your learners what they feel they need. Look at what sort of skills they might want to go with. Get their opinions and work towards that. A couple of ways to do it in theoretical lessons is you can make deliberate spelling, grammar, and punctuation errors when you're using handouts and presentations and so on. Then tell them, that I have made a mistake, but I want you to try and find it, but I don't want you to, don't distract them. Tell them they've got it and then see if they can correct it. When you're assessing learners' work, rather than point out an error that they've made, if they've got a spelling mistake or they've not put their grammar or punctuation in the correct place, point out the sentence and say to them, can you find it yourself? If they can't find it, ask them to discuss the sentence with another learner and see if they can work it out. If they're still stuck, then step in and help them out. So in sessions, you also need to be careful that when you're using technology that you use it appropriately. Make sure that they're not accessing unsuitable websites or checking emails or playing games and social media and so on. Regardless of their age, everybody gets distracted, especially when they've got a particular device in front of them. And they do want to just be carrying on doing other things that they shouldn't be doing. So within settings, you normally have restrictions on your sites as it is anyway, especially for the younger learners within primary schools. But that doesn't stop them from playing games. So you've got to make sure that you're walking around and you're checking to make sure that everybody is paying attention to what they're meant to be doing. So it's just about being really hands-on in these type of sessions. So, how to answer 2.2. So again, AC 2.2 for Unit 3 can be cross-referred to Unit 2's Learning Outcome for AC 4.2. So if you have that and it's been marked off and it's complete, then you can completely cross-refer it. Make a note, say that this AC 2.2 is being cross-referred to so-and-so over there. If you've not done that, then I would like you to explain using a detailed example of how you apply minimum core elements when you're delivering inclusive teaching and learning. So what that is you're just going to talk about what you do on a daily basis. You pick a session. So if you're doing spelling, talk about what you do. How do you do it? What sort of resources are you using to support this? So if I was to do a spelling lesson now when I'm doing a test for students, at first I would ask them I would go over the sound. If I was in, say, year 1 or 2, the younger learners, I would go over the sound that we're going to be practicing, say, A, stay, play, may. You know, those to A with those. And then I would say, right, we're going to be doing this sound. Do you remember we did a few words last week? We talk over it, have a bit of a chit-chat, you know, get them all warmed up. And then I'd say, okay, get out your spelling test books and I'd like you to write numbers 1 to 10. Then I'd model it on the whiteboard and then they would do it in list format. So that is me embedding maths. I've already done English where I was speaking. Now I've done it in maths where they've actually physically wrote it down. And then I would read out the words that I wanted them to spell, go over them carefully. At the end of the session, I would say, right, let's check our work. And then I would possibly use the ICT on the board, put the words on the board, and say, right, the answer for the first one is PLAY, play. Who's got it right? And so on. So you've got your English, maths, and ICT embedded in that simple 20-minute spelling test that you were doing.